some of the things that I see the most is this lack of comfort talking about sex. I think women and femme folk have more leeway to talk about sex for lots of reasons. Some men we can talk about sex, but it has to be in this either like jokey or aggressive way.
Welcome to episode number 196 of the Couples Therapist Couch.
Welcome to the Couples Therapist Couch, the podcast for couples therapists, marriage counselors, and relationship coaches to explore the practice of couples therapy. And now, your host, Shane Birkel.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Couples Therapist Couch. This is your host, Shane Birkel, and this is the podcast that's all about the practice of couples therapy. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoy the episode and you want to be part of a community, then definitely join the Couples Therapist Couch Facebook group. That's completely free. Obviously, you can always join the Couples Therapist Inner Circle, which is the paid basically an amazing supervision group where we talk about couples therapy. Therapists ask questions. There's a ton of course material on working with affairs, working with emotionally focused therapy, doing relational life therapy, all kinds of different course material that you can get access to. And I'm really excited. I'm sort of revamping the whole inner circle, and there's a new business option, which is about building your couples therapy practice, which it could be an add-on to the clinical side of things if that's something that's a good fit for you. So go over to the website and check it out. You can get a lot more details and information. I don't want to take too much time talking about it here on the podcast, but it's something you should definitely take a look at if it feels like that could be a good fit for you. Today I'm sharing an interview where I spoke with David Khalili, who is the founder of Rouse Relational Wellness and the author of the Mental Health Workbook for Men. He and I talk all about men and anxiety, men and sexuality, men and mental health. And I think that there is a specific way in which men and women are socialized in society that continue to create different challenges, different problems, different ways that mental health issues show up. Now, obviously, it's not true 100% of the time, but generally speaking, there are some patterns and trends that David and I get into and talk about a little bit that are really important for therapists to be aware of. So without further introduction, here's the interview with David Khalili. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Couples Therapist Couch. This is Shane Birkel, and today I'm speaking with David Khalili, founder of Rouse Relational Wellness, sex and relationship therapist, and author of the Mental Health Workbook for Men. Hey, David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Shane. How are you?
Great. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you today about men and anxiety and sexuality and your workbook for sure. But before we get into everything, why don't you tell everyone a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. So I've been in sexual wellness, the world of sexual wellness for about 20 years and mental health for about 15 years. And about 2 years ago, I started Rouse Relational Wellness in San Francisco in California. And our whole focus is to help reduce shame and anxiety around sex and relationships. And we primarily work with queer, kinky, poly, and BIPOC folks. But we also work with all kinds of people. But a majority of our providers here are queer, kinky, poly, and BIPOC. So we're wanting to help our clients find the providers that work right for them, and understand them, understand where they're coming from, and help them be their whole full selves. I was born first generation American born and queer, and growing up, I had a lot of experiences of not feeling like I was enough, like not American enough, not Persian enough, or Middle Eastern enough, not gay enough, not straight enough, not this or that, and really wanting to provide a space for people to really understand their full selves, their true selves, and learn to love themselves. And so, yeah, we've been going on for 2 years, and it's been a lot of fun. And I really like doing multiple different things. And so we do therapy, but we also do workshops and groups, and I like supervising and teaching. And so I'm really glad to be here and talk about sex and anxiety in men.
Yeah, that's great. And I have some ideas about this, but I'd love to hear you talk about the some of the, just to lay a foundation maybe of some of the reasons why, there is so much shame and anxiety about, particularly for people who identify as queer or polyamorous or all,
Mhm.
non-traditional. I don't know if that's how you would say
Yeah.
it as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll kind of go in line. The shame and anxiety around sex for men would, a lot of what plays into that piece is this pressure for men in the States to kind of be this rugged individual, to get shit done on their own, to kind of get things right away. This especially around sex, this pressure to just know how to have sex, know how to give orgasms, know how to be sexual without having to learn anything, without having to talk with the people that they're engaging with, without this kind of back and forth. It's this, deal with it on your own and figure it out sort of thing. And while that can be helpful in lots of ways to, be self-reliant and all that good stuff, it's not great when it comes to relationships, as we both know. And then what ends up happening is, if you have this expectation of yourself to just get things right the first time, be this sexually skilled person without much input, if you make a mistake, or if it doesn't go to your expectations, then it can really go into this anxiety loop of, well, now the rest of it's not going to go well. Now this is going to be a really frustrating experience, or the shame spiral of, I'm a horrible man, I'm a bad lover, so on and so on and so on.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's one big issue for men around shame, sex, and anxiety. I think also for men, this is definitely changing a lot these days. There's a lot more hope and vulnerability. There's a lot more men that can kind of expand their definition of sexuality, and not feel like they have to act straight all the time, or pretend like they don't have same-sex attractions, or even pretend like they can recognize that another man is attractive. But some men, because of bullying, because of harassment, discrimination, they limit themselves in the type of sex acts or the sexual exploration that they can have, because certain body parts are seen as gay, or certain acts are seen as gay, when really it's not gay or straight. It's just, that's your body, that's what you like, there's nerve endings there, why won't you like it? So that kind of restriction will really cause an impact on some more straight identified men. um,
Right.
Queer and poly folks, there's like the stigma that's involved. I'm in the Bay Area, so it's like, I hear from monogamous people that they have a hard time finding other monogamous people to date in the Bay Area. So it's not, the stigma here isn't that big of an issue, but
Mhm.
um, it's certainly an issue in other parts of the country, and being gay or queer is definitely a big issue, especially with all the legislative actions that are going into place. And so there's the aspect of harassment and discrimination from people in their life, but also this awareness, the stress of the harassment and discrimination that's coming on from above, of the government legislation and things like that. And so that definitely adds shame and anxiety, coming out, or seeing themselves as full and whole, rather than being seen as pathological because they're queer or poly or kinky.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, those would be some big ones. I
Yeah,
would
that
say
was
there's
amazing. Yeah,
aspects
thank
too.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love what you were saying about this, the way that we're socialized, I think, as males, oftentimes is this idea that, we should have all the answers, right? And it really limits our ability to be in relationship with others, and to understand that, there's, to have the acceptance of what we want, or what we feel like would be pleasurable, versus having the ability to ask someone else, what do you want and what do you think would be pleasurable, right? And
Right.
working through those conversations. And doesn't necessarily mean that you're always going to be willing to do all the things that the partner wants to
Yep.
do, but at the same time, just being open to have those conversations, and not feeling like there's a right and a wrong way of doing this, and I'm supposed to know exactly what to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be really limiting, and yeah, just very
And so,
limiting and
is
pressure.
your workbook geared towards men in general, or is it for a particular who would it be
Mm.
most helpful for, would you say?
Yeah, no, it's definitely for men in general. It's trans inclusive and non-binary inclusive. So I use ACT and positive psychology and mindfulness, really, to kind of blend in different modalities in this book. It's largely based on ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, to the listeners. But I've also weaved in queer theory and critical race theory, because before getting into the world of therapy, I got my master's in sexuality studies, where queer theory and critical race theory were like drilled in my head and in lots of good ways, and really helped with kind of expanding my understanding of uh, gender and race and identity. And so my mission for this book is to help men expand their definition of masculinity, expand their definition of sex and intimacy, um, and go from a values-based approach. Like, what are your values? What do you want to do with your life? What are your goals in life? And how can we help you identify and follow them? Because I find that that's a really good motivator. It's, instead of me telling them what to do or how they should act, obviously that would be the right approach, but kind of guiding them to decide for themselves, what's my values and how can I act from those values?
Mm-hmm. And what are some common things that you hear when you're working with men in particular, as far as what they're struggling with or how they're identifying the problem that they have or the things that they're dealing with?
Yeah, I think there's definitely, it varies, but I think some of the things that I see the most is this lack of comfort talking about sex. I think women and femme folk have more leeway to talk about sex for lots of reasons. Some men, we can talk about sex, but it has to be in this either like jokey or aggressive way. But to talk about it in this vulnerable way of like, sometimes my penis doesn't work and it's upsetting, or sometimes I like to be touched in these areas and I don't know how to ask for it, or whatnot. I think those are the conversations that can really benefit obviously a couple, but can be a big challenge for some men out of just lack of practice and some embarrassment. And so their nervous system takes over and they go into fight, flight, or freeze, and they get embarrassed maybe, or they just shut down. Yeah, that would be a big one, I would say, as a comfort talking about sex, or expectations of what should happen.
Yeah. And along those lines, do you feel like they're struggling in their relationship with their partner, and they're like, I don't know how to talk about these things. How am I gonna,
Yeah.
is it creating stress for them in their relationship at that point, and so they reach out to you to try to get some relief from that kind of stress?
Yeah, that's a solid point. Yeah, I'm also looking at, what's going on between the partners outside of sex. How do they have arguments? How do they resolve arguments? How do they, divvy up household chores? What resentments are there? What expectations are there? And so I'm asking them, yeah, just those questions, what's going on in the background, and also trying to break down their like relational map. Like, what are they expecting out of a relationship, and what do they expect out of a relationship that's unspoken? And will that lead to resentments, which then follows up to troubles with sex?
Yeah. Sometimes I tell couples when I'm working with them that your problem is not sex, your problem is your communication about sex, or
Totally.
the
Yeah,
goal to define success, I think, is not about having everything you want with sex. It's about your ability to talk about sex with each other, I think, something like
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's like one of my big goals with individuals and couples is, and especially with couples, is to help them talk openly and comfortably about sex with each other. I
Mhm.
could jump in and do psycho ed all day long, but giving them the practice and to dip into the vulnerability and make mistakes, or with talking to each other, or just kind of like checking in with each other, I think that's really good practice for them to have.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit more about, what it means to reduce the anxiety or the shame around sex for people in general, or for clients you work with?
Yeah, I so there's a few, in my mind, there's a few things that go into play. I think a lot of therapists do this, but we definitely look at the here and now symptoms, and so we can use some kind of short-term concrete approaches like ACT, DBT, things like that, to help with how anxiety is like really impacting their nervous system and their physiology and things like that. And then we use depth-oriented approaches like existential work or psychodynamic approach or attachment work for sure, or EFT, to look at the underlying stuff that's underneath that's keeping this stuff going, this anxiety and shame. And so it's like a two-prong approach to working with our clients or couples. And then we're looking at what are some of the earlier experiences, trauma-related experiences that are that have been made, that have internalized this anxious or shame-filled experiences, or what are the narratives, what are the thoughts, expectations that they're connecting to that are increasing the shame and anxiety. Just trying to break it down for them, helping them kind of navigate what sort of rules they've made for themselves or what sort of rules they've internalized from others. And one of my exercises in this book is to take messages that you received from being a man while you're growing up and laying them all out and then saying, okay, which ones do I want to keep and which ones do I want to do the best that I can to push away? And so it's kind of doing like a forensic audit of all the narratives that you've had and all the experiences that you've had, and seeing, okay, what's connected to what you're experiencing now and what can we do with that, and how can we help you integrate all your parts, help you understand yourself and love yourself in a whole way.
Yeah, that's great. Do you find that people often have a hard time even identifying what some of the influencing factors were growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes they can, when I ask that question, they can seem a little lost because they're, maybe getting a little flooded, or they're going back and they're just kind of not really sure where to start with thinking about that. And so I'll give different scenarios of different implicit or explicit messages that they've received from their dad or their uncles or other kids in school that would really like influence these narratives that they have. Yeah, how would you work with that to kind of get them to unpack it a bit more?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at, part of the way in which people who identify as male are socialized in our society is really to avoid the emotions, avoid the emotional expression, or even to criticize the emotions, to feel like there's something wrong with feeling emotions in the first place.
Yeah.
And so what happens, I think, a lot of times, whether it's by emotional neglect or if it's by overt criticism of the person for having emotions,
Hmm.
either one, it's a very shaming process where, little boys learn, in order to be a good boy, I need to not feel these emotions. And so, I think that's part of the problem when we're working with someone in the present and they're experiencing all kinds of stress and anxiety and struggle and shame, maybe not even realizing that not that they would use that language, but that um they have a hard time even remembering anything about their childhood, or remembering, feeling anything negative in their childhood, or something like that,
Yeah.
because it was just normal at the time. And when you have that kind of emotional neglect, it's also much harder to when we have emotional connections to our experiences as children, we're much more likely to remember them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been my experience, particularly with people who identify as male, who grew up as a male, experiencing that kind of socialization.
Yeah. Have you found, I found mindfulness can help sometimes, or some somatic approaches. Have you found that to be helpful too, just to begin the process of connecting with their emotions?
Yeah, absolutely. And something you said before too, which was about, sort of giving them examples, you know, uh,
Right.
and for sometimes for people who have kids, it's easier for them because they can
Yeah.
imagine, like, well, of course my kid feels scared and hurt and lonely sometimes. And it's like, yeah, don't you think you might have felt that when you were
Yeah.
7 years old too? Like, and trying to help them sort of resonate with other people's experiences, but absolutely, like, using that mindfulness as well to
Hmm.
sort of just help, really accentuate any tiny little sensation that they might be experiencing in the moment, and trying to just sort of like continue to build
Yeah.
awareness around those things.
That's great. Yeah. Remind me of like the men's groups that I run, or just men's groups in general, and kind of seeing that modeling from many different types of men in the group, of them accessing their emotions or talking about their emotions, we had one group session where one of the guys was saying that he was writing thank you cards to his guy friends after doing a men's trip. And one of the other guys was like, I would never do that at all. Like, I just never even crossed my mind. And he just, And it was such a powerful moment for him because he was like, that seems so simple, but I just would never even think about that because, and we broke it down and he was like, it seems a little girly is what he said. I don't think it is. I like logically know it's not to write a letter, but based on, my experiences growing up, like that does feel a little like not a manly thing to do. And so then we can kind of break that down more and more. But having that challenge from the other guy in the group to, see his perspective and his experience was a good mirror or a good, perspective for him.
Yeah, and I think another interesting thing I'd love to hear you talk about is like this idea that I hear from men so often about being a burden on other people. Like,
Right.
I don't want to text, I don't want to call my friend to talk for 10 minutes because maybe he's busy, or maybe like I don't want to be a burden on him, or I don't want to write a letter because then he'll feel like he owes me something, or like, this whole thing. And sometimes I wonder, is that like a cover up for vulnerability, or is I do
Um,
think it's a real thing too, at the same
sure.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I've definitely seen that. I've personally felt that. I
Yeah,
think
me
there's
too.
lots of ways that I'm constantly pushing through the kind of internalized messages of masculinity or individualism. um, yeah, I mean, I do a similar approach to what you just shared a few minutes ago, which is kind of that perspective taking of like, okay, well, when your friend calls you because they're having an issue with their XYZ, are you like, fuck this guy again? Or do you feel helpful to, that you're helping them out? And they they answer honestly. And that can help us with kind of giving that perspective again the next time that they want to go through. And also I think working against this all or nothing approach,
Hmm.
or all or nothing thinking where, they say, well, then we're going to have to like keep up this weekly thing, or it's going to lead to this expectation or obligation. Like, no, just try this out. Well, and I empathize with them. I'll share, like, I've been there. I've had those anxious moments before reaching out to a friend. I get it. But it can feel really good. Or you learn that maybe that's not the right friend to reach out to for these things. That's the other thing I talk to is like knowing your audience,
Hmm.
knowing identifying the people in your life that you can trust, that you can open up to a little bit, that you can share a little bit of those shameful secrets to, and start to blossom a little bit more and build up that secure attachment style through those experiences. Because I don't want to say just go up to any friend randomly. I don't want to set them up for more humiliation or more shame.
Right.
So yeah.
There's something interesting too, because I think there are people in the world who overshare or over expect too much from other people, if that's
Yep.
a way of saying it, in the relationship. And I think that's the fear, right? That they're going to become this person who is like a burden on another person. And sometimes I'll say to people like that, I'll say, the fact that you actually feel like you're going to be a burden tells me that you are never going to be on that end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Or like from where you are right now, where you're really reserved and you're really held back, like there's going to be a lot of steps between where you're at right now and this
Right.
like overshare.
Yeah. I'll let you
It's
know. We'll assess it as we go here. Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the nice thing about having a therapist is, right, is like, yeah, we'll talk about it. This is your place to practice. This is your place to get that feedback and that open discovery.
Yeah. That's great. One of the other things I was thinking of when you were talking about your men's groups is the idea that, you know, oftentimes for men, they'll have a hard time moving into compassion for themselves. So
Mm,
they'll talk about, maybe going through abusive situations when they were a child, and just sort of feeling like, well, it wasn't that big of a deal. That was just
yeah.
normal, blah, blah, blah. But then, they'll hear the experiences of someone else who had the exact same or a similar experience, and they'll have a huge amount of compassion for that person, and say, feel like, oh my gosh, like the sadness, they'll actually connect to the sadness of what it's like
Yeah.
to go through something like that, which is why I think the groups can be so helpful, because hearing other people's situations can really resonate and help people connect to their own reality.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also, right, it helps them name what they've been experiencing but haven't been able to name, and also helps them with perspectives on the other end of the coin. When we're talking about relationship issues, whether romantic or family or friends, sometimes a guy in the group will present an issue that came up between his partner and him, and Maybe he's the more anxious one and his partner's the more avoidant one. And then someone in the group will chime in and say, yeah, I actually identify with your partner a lot. And can I share with you what my experience has been in those situations? And it can be a really good kind of balance for, again, this with a trauma response or a threat response or an anxious response is often to go into all or nothing. And that type of like concrete thinking. And so having that perspective can really help kind of slow things down and think things through a bit differently.
Yeah, that's great. And how much of the time do you feel like you have these conversations with people in individual therapy versus couples therapy, or what do you see as, being valuable about each or different?
I think with couples therapy, I try to use it as like an experiential process, like a lot of couples therapists do, where having them talk to each other. They're facing each other lots of times. There's some contact sometimes, and so they're practicing these communication skills, but also going a little bit deeper in this container of our work. Like I do 3-hour intensives with some couples, and it's not good for all couples, but we do a screening process, and that 3 hours really helps them dive in and out of different nervous system responses and reactions, and um, help you get flooded and then grounded again. And so there's time to kind of reflect on what's going on and connect with each other during those 3 hours. With individual sessions, it's a reflective process, of going over their different experiences that are happening recently and connecting them to the past, and doing some self-compassion work. A lot of the men I work with have a very harsh inner critic, and so we do some parts work or some acceptance and commitment therapy work to help them slow down and interact with those critical parts of themselves a little bit differently. Help them turn down the volume on those critical parts a bit.
Yeah, that's great. And do you describe that as uh, in the category of like shaming, as far as the way that they're treating themselves, or part of the shame, like the way they see themselves, that's part of the shame? Is that how you would
Absolutely.
characterize it?
Yeah. And I'll talk to them about that. The times that I notice them shaming themselves, I'll bring it to their attention and ask if they're noticing it too, or what, make it a conversation really. Um, but I'll often talk about how shaming is a way of causing us to hide or retreat, or making it difficult to change or develop. When you're shaming yourself, you're just like, I'm horrible. It's just like this flat, all person ascription sort of thing. Uh, but when we can break it down into the behavior or the specific thing, then we can kind of help them work through it a bit differently. But yeah, I can see that the inner critic being very, very shameful or shaming.
Part of, I think, the discord in society, is very much about preserving the patriarchy, if that makes sense, as far as like, if
Yeah,
anybody says something like, oh, toxic masculinity, there's like a big sort of like brush back to that about like, no, like these aspects of men are good, and we
right,
shouldn't get whatever someone would say. I'm not thinking of anything great to say, but it's like, and you said it at the beginning, like those are strengths, those can be strengths, those certain
right,
aspects that are considered male qualities historically. But
right.
can you speak a little bit to the idea of, how do, because the way you're talking about this is very valuing of men,
Mm,
and it's all about helping them to not go into the shame.
right.
But at the same time, I imagine you see yourself as someone who's battling toxic masculinity, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. I think, and the battles that I see myself in is when there's these like just hard and fast rules of what should happen or what should be based on
Mhm.
the man or their partner, regardless of gender. But if they're straight or they date women, then there's this expectation of, women should be this way and men should be this way, and there's this like polarity that should be happening that will, and I don't buy into it. I don't, and so it can be a challenge where, I don't want to get into political debates with my clients, but I do want to kind of help them challenge their own notions that are restricting them. And so I will maybe highlight the ways that it's restricting them and highlight the ways that it's building up on them and strengthening them and all that good stuff. But letting them open the doors to acknowledging what parts of this is impacting them. Like, yeah, well, I do get lonely sometimes. I mean, that would actually be a big jump for them to say that, but something to that effect, where once they open up that door, then I'm rushing in and helping them with kind of exploring the not so helpful aspects. But I've heard guys where, like, one guy told me, this was at a dog park, it wasn't a client, but he said, I just had a job interview and they asked me what my weaknesses are, and I was so offended that they would even ask me that question, because like they would just assume that I have weaknesses. And he was just puffed up chest, and I tried to kind of share with him a different perspective, but he wasn't hearing it. And my heart goes out to him, because he was sold a bill of goods where he shouldn't have weaknesses. And so now he's like battling himself and all these other people because of this misbelief that he, as a human, can't have flaws.
Well, yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest problems in the way of seeing the world, that, and again, it can happen to whether you're male or female or non-binary. But the idea that it's not okay to make mistakes, so as soon as I feel stressed, or as soon as like there's an idea that I might have made a mistake, I'm either shaming myself and coming down on myself, or I'm looking for who else to blame, who did something wrong, right? So
Yeah.
part of what you're talking about is the flexibility to be understanding and have compassion about everybody makes mistakes, and that's okay. And it's not about figuring out who to punish for it or something like that.
Right. And to never have mistakes ever again, never be in trouble again. Or yeah, I've done a lot of training with Martha Kauppi, and she's a sex and
Oh yeah.
relationship therapist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's great. Yeah.
Yeah. I did her year-long study program. That was fantastic. And I really like her approach to a lot of these, where she talks about the linear model of sex versus the circular model of sex, and how the linear model of sex is like the basis where you get from one step to the next. And in order for you to get to the next step, the first step has to work. And there can be really restrictive expectations of what work means. And so, if it feels fumbly during making out, you may feel like, okay, screw it, never mind. Or, if you're having a hard time with an erection, you may say, screw it, never mind, and not even try again. But it's that process of learning, process of even just treating our bodies not as mistakes. Like losing an erection is not a mistake. It's a part of your physiology, and you would benefit from learning more about how you work in that way, how your erections work, how your arousal system works. But I really appreciate her approach to de-shaming and adding more compassion to this.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, I was just thinking of the mindfulness, how, or the non-judgment maybe of, how amazing would it be if someone lost an erection and was just able to be sort of curious about it, and not, there's no shame, no judgment, just sort of like, oh, that's interesting. It's not what I was hoping for at this moment, but
Right.
like not bringing this whole level of anxiety and stress to the
Yeah.
moment,
Everything's screwed, we're done. Yeah, just like hopelessness. Yeah.
Well, and I'm wondering, so a lot of the listeners are therapists,
Mhm.
and for those who don't have a lot of training in doing sex therapy, I'm wondering what are some, if you have any words of wisdom for how, couples therapists can sort of bring more of that into the conversation, or be more, open or accepting with the client, to make them feel more comfortable to bring stuff up with them and things like that.
I think working on your own comfort with talking about sex would be a big one. I hear a lot from clients and from therapists themselves that, I do a lot of trainings on talking about sex and introducing sex to introducing the topic of sex to clients. And that's a big thing, is like, I'm uncomfortable. I'm worried that if I bring up sex talking as a therapist, that I'm going to get nervous, I'm going to blush, they're going to read it on me, and then the whole session goes south. And so finding ways to get more comfortable talking about sex. There are programs called SARS. They're sexual attitude reassessment or readjustment. It's through ASECT. And essentially it's a long, like an 8-hour process of going through different erotic materials and reflecting on what's coming up for you. And it's a really good way. It's like a bias training of sorts. And that can be a deep dive and too much for some, but for others, it can be a really good way of addressing your biases and your comfort level. Um, so whatever they may be, or having a consultant or going through your own sex therapy training, um, Martha Calpe, like I just recommended, or as a shameless plug, we have rouseacademy.com, where we have a bunch of our CE courses on sex therapy. Um, but really, like, again, reaching out and getting support so that you're not just trying to figure it out on your own. Some good starter books would be Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. These are all ones that people have heard of. She Comes First by Ian Kerner, Polysecure or Polywise by Jessica Fern. Um, Sex, Comma Sex by Corey Silverberg was written for teens. It's like a graphic novel. But I think it's great. I think it's great for all adults. Um, and so I also do I give a lot of resources. I've recommended your podcast in the past to couples. I've recommended other podcasts or videos or books, anything to match the person's learning style, to help them really educate themselves and get more comfortable talking about it. And then asking themselves, why am I uncomfortable talking about sex? Kind of those sort of self-reflective questions in training.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and for those who may not have been listening to this podcast for a long time, I have had interviews with Martha Calpe and Emily Nagoski and Ian Kerner, and there's another really good one, Tammy Nelson. I don't know if
Yeah,
you've heard
she's
of
great.
her.
Yeah.
Um, but I went to a training with her. It was like a full day training, and it was sort of like that get comfortable with
Uh-huh.
like sexual material kind of thing. And it
Yeah.
was really helpful. I mean, it's like a room full of therapists, so it's kind of embarrassing, but it's like, part of that process of just sort of like increasing
Yeah.
your comfort level with experiencing that kind of thing, talking about that kind of thing with strangers. It was great. So I definitely recommend people check out your stuff at I'll
So,
have you say your what's your
yeah,
website? Just
Rouse
say it now.
Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah, rouseacademy.com.
Yeah, because I think that's really helpful. And I think, I don't know if you can say what you think as well, but I feel like even if you do feel uncomfortable with it, even if you do feel like you're blushing, even if you know, whatever, like I think, the human beings who we're working with are pretty forgiving about that kind of thing, and they'll
Yeah.
feel a sense of relief just that you're bringing up the topic and you're bringing it into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have it in my, no, that's a really good compassionate point. And I have it in my intake forms, and I ask it in the first session, how's your sex life? And if they say, yeah, it's fine, nothing to worry about, I'll say, okay, well, just so you know, we can always talk about it. It's on the table. But me asking it in the intake and in the first session is helping them know that this is a topic that is up for grabs.
Yeah, that's great. And if a client were to tell, if a couple, let's say, were to tell you like, oh yeah, no, everything's fine with that, I mean, do you just take that at face value?
In the first session, I do, depending on
Yeah.
what we're working with. But then after the next session, then I'll dig in a bit more and bring it up again. Yeah.
I mean, I
How about for
imagine
you?
that could be true for for some percentage of people, that maybe that's not really what's going to be most helpful about going to couples therapy. They need other things. And
Right.
you know at the same time, I imagine there's another percentage of people where they're just not going to bring it up, and it might take a little bit more encouragement to get
Yeah.
into the conversation.
That's why, yeah, I try to do like the knocks on the door. Although I I'm very gentle in my approaches, and I've learned over the years that I can be a little less gentle. I can be a little more pokey. So
Yeah, I feel like that's happened to me as well. It's
uh,
interesting, and sometimes I feel guilty about, either telling people too directly the truth that I see in front of me or something, or poking a
I,
little bit, but at the same time, like I've had so many situations where it just leads to something so important
Absolutely.
And I think we can try to be as respectful as possible while at the
Yeah.
same time bringing a little bit of that energy into it as well.
Yeah. No, again, right. It's like the delivery and like what they're reading from you and the relationship that they have with you already.
That's a good point, right? I think when I've done that, it's been with people who know that I care about them and want what's best for them, and we've had time to build some rapport.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can give that side eye of like, really? Is that really what
Right.
you
Right. That's important. Yeah, that's good. So, anything else? I know we're getting close to the end of time here. Anything else that would be important for us to talk about with all these topics?
Yeah, I think I was just giving a talk on Saturday about anxious attachments in polyamorous relationships. And so I think, looking and understanding your own protest behaviors, which is the things that show up. I forget that this is mostly therapists that are listening to, but
Uh-huh.
for therapists that are listening, I think um, understanding how protest behaviors show up in poly relationships, because I think there's some therapists that work with poly folks that they are so considerate to not pathologize their poly clients that they may go into the other end of the spectrum, which is like they're not
Uh-huh.
really examining too much. Um, I don't see that happening too often, but looking at protest behaviors and poly relationships, understanding that attachment styles can show up differently in different partnerships within a polyamorous relationship, uh, and then just building up more comfort talking about sex, practicing talking about sex with your friends, definitely with your partner, um, and with your consultants or with your colleagues. I think that can be a really good move for your practice.
That's great. And what do you mean by protest behaviors? What are you talking about?
Yeah, protest behaviors in terms of like anxious attachment styles, where it's these indirect ways of maintaining connection. And so the way I see it in polyamorous relationships, uh, let's say even though you have an agreement that you two each have partners and you go out on weekly dates, a protest behavior could be when your partner is going out on their date, for the 3 hours before their date, you're really causing a big argument, and all of a sudden there's a big issue about the dishes and you're really pulling their attention and their focus. Or another protest behavior in poly relationships is making like snide remarks about the metamor or your partner's partner, never really saying anything too directly negative, but kind of scoffing at them or negging them a little bit. um, and then another one would be which is typical in all anxious attachment styles, is just like that constant seeking reassurance,
Mm-hmm.
maybe texting them while they're on their date with their partner, or texting them while they're at work and asking for reassurance about the poly lifestyle or their poly agreements. There's lots of things underneath it and above it, of course, and there's more nuance than what I just shared, but those would be kind of the starter points that I would look at.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. And it makes sense to me what you're saying, right? That, if I want to be a therapist who's really supportive of polyamorous relationships and, lets my clients feel valued by being in the room, you know,
Mm.
then I might be less likely to sort of like take on those issues and name it for what I see, because I don't want them to get the sense that I'm like,
Yeah,
uh pushing against their decisions about that or whatever, something.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
right. But and I guess to your point of like the relationship is built, they know that we care about them, we know that you know we're on their side, we can push on that a bit and show that I'm not just trying to put down your whole relationship, I'm trying to look at these different aspects.
definitely. Right. And it's for the sake of you having even better relationships.
Yeah, right. We want you to be happier and yeah, be
Yeah.
more connected to yourself and others.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. That's a good point. Yeah. Appreciate that. So, can you mention anything that, your website or again, and anything else you'd like people to where you'd like to direct people to?
Yeah, for sure. So Rouse Relational Wellness is the name of my practice. We See people in person in San Francisco and online in California. It's rousetherapy.com. And then our educational platform is rouseacademy.com, where we have a bunch of different courses like sex and intimacy for survivors, or navigating polyamory with queer male clients, different CE courses to help with expanding your sex therapy skills. And then my workbook, the mental health workbook for men, is everywhere where books are sold. Target, or that one small company that Jeff Bezos owns, or Barnes and Noble.
Like he who must not be named. Yeah, the
But
company
yeah, right.
that must not be named.
Jeff guy, yeah. It's bookshop.org. Yeah,
yeah,
there's the one, the independent one.
yeah. Great. And I'll put links in the show notes so that people can find those really easily. But thank you so much. Yeah, I think everybody should go check out the your website, your training for therapists. That sounds really good.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've like I told you, in the beginning, I've been listening to this podcast for a while, so it's nice to be on it.
All right. Thank you so much, David. I'm really grateful for you. What a great conversation we were able to have there. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else learned a lot. And thank you to all you listeners out there. Definitely go get a copy of the Mental Health Workbook for Men. You can also check out rousetherapy.com and rouseacademy.com. And I'd really appreciate if you are enjoying the episodes on the podcast, please leave a rating or a review wherever it is that you listen to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, all of those types of things. And if you haven't checked it out already, definitely go to YouTube and check out the videos that are being uploaded there if you want to watch the video recording of the podcast. Also, if you're interested, this episode is sponsored by the Couples Therapist Inner Circle, which is the membership site that I created about working with couples. And, at this point, there's hundreds of hours of content to help you become a better couples therapist. If you're just starting out, it's a really great way to get going. If you are a very experienced therapist, it's a great way to get education on working with affairs, working with high conflict couples, working with emotionally focused therapy, relational life therapy, all kinds of different things. And there's a really cool new way that I'm setting it up, which is that you can do an add-on bonus to your inner circle, which is about the business of couples therapy. And it's all about building a profitable couples therapy practice. And I'm really excited. I've been working with a bunch of people on building their practice, starting a podcast, being on social media more, all kinds of different goals that people have for themselves, how to use marketing. So I'm excited about that. If that's something that appeals to you, definitely click on it in the show notes. And if you're just interested in the clinical side, then you can get that option. If you want to get the business side, then you can get the clinical plus the business. So there's something for everyone there. And also, there, please join the free Couples Therapist Couch Facebook group. If that's where you're at in your career, you just want to join the free group. That's another great resource to take advantage of. And I'm always grateful for ratings and reviews on wherever you listen to podcasts. I really appreciate that. This is Shane Birkel, and this is the Couples Therapist Couch, the podcast that's all about the practice of couples therapy. I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, everybody.